They could tell if a queen was fertile, sick, or even poisoned just by looking at the water her laundry was soaked in. I'm your host, Cloaked Testament, and this is the Time-Worn Record, where we deep dive into the most mysterious corners of history, unveiling the truths or myths that have been hidden or forgotten. What could possibly be hidden behind the curtain today? In the royal courts of Europe, there were secrets more guarded than military plans. Not the crown jewels, not the king's correspondence, but a handful of stained cloths, rinsed in basins of cold water, kept hidden from all but a select few. These were no ordinary linens. They were the queen's menstrual cloths, the most intimate record of her body, her health, and the future of her dynasty. Every mark, every shade, every change in color could trigger whispers. In the palace corridors, was she pregnant? Had she miscarried? Was she ill? These weren't idle questions. The answers could shift alliances, spark wars, or destroy a reign. And the woman at the center of it all? She wasn't allowed to keep her own secrets. Her body was a state affair. From the 1600s onward, a royal woman's cycle was tracked, like the movements of an army. Palace doctors noted each month's timing. Chambermaids passed observations to noble attendants. Courtiers relayed coded updates to foreign diplomats. Even the king might receive a carefully worded report, confirming whether his wife was bleeding. Some of these reports survive in archives, thin sheets of paper covered in careful handwriting, describing the most personal details in deliberately vague but unmistakable language. And all of this happened while she was trapped inside a fortress of fashion. Royal gowns weren't simply beautiful. They were heavy, complex, and restrictive layers of petticoats, stiff corsets, panniers stretching skirts to impossible widths. Some ensembles weighed as much as a small child. Beneath them, she wore long linen shifts and tightly bound stays. Changing a menstrual cloth wasn't a quick task. It meant partial undressing, unlacing corsets, lifting skirts, all with the help of a lady-in-waiting. Those cloths themselves were surprisingly luxurious. Forget disposable pads, these were hand-sewn from fine linen or soft cotton, sometimes imported from abroad. The wealthiest might have silk trimmings or embroidered edges. For odor control, they could be lightly perfumed with rosewater, lavender or musk. They were worn tied to a belt at the waist, or fastened with ribbons, held in place under layers of undergarments. Some queens preferred thicker padding to avoid leaks. Others, desperate to remain comfortable during long ceremonies, requested thinner, softer cloths and changed more frequently. Once used, their journey was just beginning. The cloths were first soaked in cold water to loosen the blood. Into this water, attendants might add vinegar, wine or salt, not for cleanliness alone, but because some believed it preserved health or prevented corruption of the blood. Physicians sometimes inspected this very water, convinced they could detect illness, fertility, or even poisoning from the color and scent. In certain courts, the water itself was carried to a physician's chamber for analysis before being discarded. After soaking, the cloths were scrubbed by hand with soap made from animal fat and lye, then dried and pressed flat for reuse. In the most cautious courts, every step was supervised. Servants who handled the queen's linens could not speak of what they saw, not just for discretion, but because the information was politically dangerous. Only noble-born women were entrusted with this duty. These ladies-in-waiting were more than companions. They were guardians of the queen's most private reality. They stood by during long ceremonies, ready to assist if she needed a change. They carried away used cloths in discreet baskets. They knew more about the queen's health than almost anyone, and their silence was part of their service. But this trust was double-edged. Ladies-in-waiting also served as conduits of information. A late period, a heavy flow, a sudden fainting spell. These could be relayed to court physicians, ministers, or even foreign ambassadors. For a queen, it meant that even those closest to her could be both protectors and informants. When a cycle faltered, the queen's body was subjected to even closer control. Irregularities meant invasive examinations. Physicians, without anesthesia or modern hygiene, would inspect her internally or study the stains for signs of fertility problems. Queen Catherine of Braganza endured years of such treatment. Her body slowly weakened by mercury-based tonics, meant to stimulate the womb, and by repeated bloodletting that left her pale and exhausted. In France, Marie-Thérèse of Spain, wife of Louis XIV, faced similar pressures. Her attendants recorded her cycles meticulously, and her failures to conceive, after repeated pregnancies ended in stillbirths, were documented in chilling detail. Her body was constantly examined, while political pamphlets circulated cruel rumors about her supposed infertility. Princess Charlotte of Wales suffered a similar fate, with constant medical interference, driven by political urgency for an heir. She would not survive to see 22. Her health eroded by the very practices meant to protect her. Not all remedies were as overtly toxic as mercury, but many were still dangerous. Herbal concoctions, pennyroyal rue, and tansy were prescribed to bring on delayed menstruation. But in high doses, these could cause liver damage or even death. Steam baths and fumigations were recommended to cleanse the womb, often leaving women lightheaded and faint from the heat. In Russia, some noble women were given baths in warm wine, believed to restore fertility. Others were instructed to wear amulets or charms under their gowns, a reminder that superstition often walked hand in hand with medicine. Through it all, the queen could never appear ill. The court demanded elegance at all times. Even in pain, she had to dance at banquets, sit for portraits, receive ambassadors, all while carrying the hidden burden of her cycle, beneath pounds of silk and whalebone. Attendants developed subtle signals to indicate when she needed relief. Corsets might be loosened slightly in a side chamber. A fresh cloth could be slipped into place behind a screen. No one beyond that inner circle could ever suspect. Duchess Elizabeth Charlotte of Orleans confided in her letters how exhausting it was to be examined, discussed, and managed as if she were a breeding animal. There was no privacy, no choice, and no escape from the monthly scrutiny, and she was far from alone in feeling that way. Across Europe, royal women shared this silent burden, their lives intertwined with politics in the most intimate way imaginable. The portraits we admire today, serene women in shimmering gowns, framed in gold, hide all of this. They conceal the damp cloths rinsed in vinegar. They hide the weight of expectation, pressing down with every missed or early cycle. They erase the quiet strength it took to endure not just the discomfort, but the constant political surveillance of one's own body. For royal women, menstruation was never just personal. It was national news. It was diplomacy. It was a weapon and sometimes a curse. And yet, beneath the lace and the jewels, they carried on. They learned to move gracefully in gowns, heavy with fabric and heavier with secrets. They smiled for portraits while wondering if the water in the laundry basin would betray them. So the next time you look into the painted eyes of a queen, remember, the real story isn't only in the crown on her head, but in the unspoken truth hidden under her skirts. The truth that every month, the fate of a kingdom could be found in a piece of cloth.